authorized to fire at will.
Hey, thanks for stopping by this Sunday afternoon for episode 3 of Defining a Good Cop. As you can see from the title, we're going to maybe be taking a little bit of a, how do I want to say this? This may not be a very comfortable conversation for some of you. From DC to Ruby Ridge, Waco to Uvalde, Minneapolis to Sherburne County, Minnesota. Why you need to wake up. But before I go any further, make sure you're checking out the merchandise. Wonderful travel mugs. Wonderful mugs. These nice shot glasses here. Coffee bar none the best stuff you will ever have. I am looking forward to seeing comments in the live chat as I stream this out. I realize this is going to be a terribly uncomfortable, terribly painful conversation, and I'm probably going to piss off a lot of you. Some of that's going to be friends and family, people that I know, respect, love, people I have worked alongside, that I count as friends and allies. So as the description of the video says, events in Sherburne County, Minnesota this week at a county commissioner meeting really made this become a vitally important conversation for us to be having. As some of you know, a lady went to speak to Sherburne County's Board of Commissioners after ostensibly 8 months of getting nowhere with them when it comes to certain topics. And they laid out their rules, and the videos are available if you want to watch. There's a 32-second clip of this lady being removed, and then there's the full context of her comments and everything that happened. And then there's also a live stream that posted to Facebook on Friday night and will be going up on Rumble later today of my conversation with this wonderful, patriotic, constitutionally minded lady and her friends. And it is brought to the forefront how important it is for us to have the scales removed from our eyes about the nature of law enforcement in the United States and how it has, over the last 60 years, really, last 6 decades, has changed. And how, true to form, conservatives have remained oftentimes terribly behind the times in their view on law enforcement. Now, that's not to say that we should be anti-law enforcement in the sense of anti-cop, the individual, or anti-deputy, the individual, or anti whatever patrolman or whatever it is, against the individual. I'm not telling you that you should hate individual cops. I'm not telling you should hate cops at all. What I'm telling you is that we have to remove the blinders that we have in our history as conservatives. And like I said in the description, the old trope is you back the blue no matter what. Because if you don't, then you're a leftist and you hate cops. And that's, like, anybody who knows me know that's not the case. I don't hate cops. I have a family member who's been in law enforcement for 20 plus years now. I have friends that have been in law enforcement for over 20 years. Some of them not quite 20 years, some of them over 20 years. I love them. I respect them. I know it's not a terribly easy job to have. You're caught in the middle. Crap rolls downhill, and at the bottom of that hill are the rank and file cops. However, to give an example of why it's so vitally important for us to have the blinders removed and to understand, is to go and watch that video that I shared on Tuesday night, and then the compilation or the full context video that I shared on Thursday that demonstrates to you why it's vitally important for you to not have blinders on. A captain of the Sherburne County Sheriff's Office physically removed a lady from a county commissioners meeting because she had the audacity to name commissioners by name. She didn't insult them. She didn't attack them. She didn't attack their integrity, their ethics, their personhood, or anything. She just mentioned their names, and the county commissioner board or chair, the county commission chair, gavelled her down, ordered the city or the county administrator to have her removed after he ordered the mic cut on her. Now, the one of the chief deputies of Sherburne County, I believe it was Chief Deputy Duran, apparently went to bat for her and brought her back in. Was able to get her brought back in to finish her comments, which they then subsequently gavelled and cut her mic again, and saying she had overstayed her welcome. Basically, she had run out of her minute and a half. Now, what we have to come to grips with is that the philosophy of law enforcement is not the old school, when we picture the 30s and the 40s of the old school Irish beat cop who would walk around talking to everyone and getting to know his neighbors. That's a horrible accent, but I was trying. The Irish beat cop in New York who knew everybody by name and they called him O'Malley, or Scotty O'Malley. That's horrible because, what self-respecting Irishman would go by the name Scotty, right? Patrick O'Malley. Hey, Judson, thanks for stopping by. But this idea where we've come back to it now with this COPS program, community-oriented policing, where you really try to get the law enforcement agency really tries to get people who are dedicated to a region, dedicated to a district. They get to know their clientele, if you will. The residents of that area, you get to know them by name and interact with them, but it's not the same as it was. And there are a lot of things in line in history of policing and history of the culture of the United States that have changed that. But we cannot any longer, as constitutional originalists, constitutional conservatives, just blindly back the blue and assume that they're on our side anymore. And so here we're gonna touch a little bit on the philosophy of law enforcement. Every situation you go into, for the most part, cops are going to be outnumbered. The police, the deputies, whatever, they're going to be outnumbered. They're always going to be on they're going to be outmanned and maybe even outgunned, if you will, by the neighborhoods that they're in. Now that's okay if you happen to be in maybe rural, Minnesota, where everybody's a good old boy, or maybe everybody looks just like you and you grew up there and whatnot. But for the most part, in every call that an officer goes to, every call that a deputy or a patrolman or whatever goes to, they're going to be outgunned. They're going to be outmanned. And one of the ways that philosophically that police take charge in that situation is behind the philosophy of use of force. Now, some of you hear use of force. Many agencies have shifted it and they no longer refer to it as a use of force continuum. They now refer to it as a response to resistance protocols or policies. But the chief aspect of law enforcement's use of force continuum starts with the philosophy of presence. What they count on is putting a person in a uniform, putting a badge on that person, putting a gun and a taser on that person now, putting them in a vehicle that clearly represents that they are from the government and they're here to help. Reagan's 9 most terrifying words. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. What that does is that indicates they are an authority. And over the years, they have beaten us, not literally. They've trained us. They have taught us that we are to be compliant to a person in that uniform. They are to be submissive to them. We are to follow their orders. We are to do what they tell us to do, even if we're not the suspect in a situation, even if we're not part of a scenario. When a cop shows up on a scene, arrives on scene, he arrives in an official capacity, in a uniform, with that badge out, that gun clearly present on his hip, and without having said a word, he's already initiated force. Now, in a good situation, the de-escalation of force is not going to have to happen because there will be no escalation in the first place. But the presence of an officer is in the first step in the use of force. Please understand that. It's impossible for you to ignore that. You have got to get that into your head. Go and ask your local police officers. Go past them. Go straight to your local police department. Go to your local sheriff's office, and we're going to get to a very strong philosophical reason why we have to understand the difference between the sheriff department and a sheriff's office. And the idea of a constitutional sheriff or a constitutional chief, and what that means. What happens in that moment is you go and you ask them, I want to see your use of force continuum. I want to see your policy on response to resistance. I promise you, first of all, they can't say no. They have to show you. That's public data. And more than likely, it's probably available somewhere, hidden, but available publicly for you to look up without having to request it. The very first level of force is presence. And you see that play out all the time. If you just go, and whether you like law enforcement, First Amendment and Second Amendment auditors or not, go and watch 10 to 15, 5 to 10 minute videos of law enforcement auditing. And when law enforcement gets called on an auditor, they show up in mass. Presence. They don't even have to necessarily take their guns out. They don't even have to put their hands on their hips, on their gun or on their taser. The very first level of force is their presence. So you take a situation like Sherburne County for the last several months. Every county commissioners meeting, there has been a deputy or this captain has been present in that room. That's a level of force. That's the first step of force. What we saw on Tuesday was the second step of force, which is actual hands-on use of force. People will say, well, it's not force. No, it is force. So the confusion is that force is only when you punch somebody or you pull your gun or you pull your taser. Those are up the scale in the use of force. There's an escalation. So there's presence, then there's verbal commands, which is the next level. And then from the verbal goes to physical, like hands-on. And then from there, there's chemical, pepper spray, mace, tear gas. And then there's the next level, which is an intermediate level, which is the use of an electronic disruption device, say a taser. And from the taser, then you escalate to potentially deadly force, right? So the fact that comes in right under the radar, not right under, right above the radar, that very first arrival, the presence of that officer is force. By policy, in every law enforcement agency in the United States that has a legitimate and reliable use of force continuum, the very fact that they're there and in uniform is force. And they're relying on your sheepish compliance, I have to do what they tell me, or there's going to be trouble. Well, who's going to be the trouble in that situation? You, because you're not doing what you're told. Now, another aspect of the philosophy of law enforcement is when they tell you to do something, they believe they're giving you a lawful order. And so there's no conversation anymore in law enforcement about whether or not an officer telling you to do something is actually lawful based on several things. And one of those is it constitutional? Cops do not get trained to think about whether or not the order or the direction that they're giving you is constitutional. They're trained to think that because you're being told to do something, you must do it because it's lawful, because they say so. Which is why we start running into a lot of these videos now where people are just walking down the street and somebody calls on them and the cop pulls up and says, "I need to see your ID." Now, there are some states that are stop and ID states. Like literally, they can pull up next to you, tell you to give you ID, and by the law of that state, by the state statutes, state codes, you have to present ID or identify yourself because the cop said so. Now, that's rare. It doesn't happen very often anymore. But I have watched over and over and over again over the last several years where a cop can just rolls up on a person and says, "I need to see your ID. We got a call." "Well, I don't care if you got a call. Why do you need to see my ID?" "Well, because I asked you for your ID, and if you don't give me ID, you're going to jail." Whoa. Guess what? That's an escalation in the use of force. That's a threat of force in the moment of the use of force that says if you do not comply, you're going to get physically assaulted. That's an aggress. That's aggression. Because they have been conditioned to believe the very words that they speak bear weight. And you have been conditioned to believe that when a cop says something to you, you must do it or else. Now, this sounds incredibly radical, but I want you to understand. Imagine you're sitting at a city park. You're minding your own business. You're not doing anything. And somebody drives by and they see that you're barbecuing in the city park, which you're perfectly entitled to do. And that person goes by and says, "Oh, I think that those people over there are having a barbecue, and I don't know that they reserve the park for themselves." Call goes to dispatch. Dispatch calls the local deputy or the neighborhood cop. The cop shows up and says, "Hey, do you have a permit to be barbecuing here today?" And you're like, "No, I'm using the city park, and these grills are provided." And there's nothing posted that says that you can't use the park. Nothing there that says it's reserved for somebody else. You just went to use the park. You got together with some friends and you decided you were going to have a little barbecue, you were going to grill, and the cop says, "No, I need to see your ID." Okay, you give it to him. Well, you don't know why. What crime have you committed? And you've been taught to comply with that. And as I have a friend who says to me all the time, "I would rather fight it in court than have to fight it there." And I'm not telling you to fight. That's not my point. My point is we have to learn that the burden of that moment is not on you, it's on them. They need to be able to articulate to you what it is that you have done that has caused suspicion, and just being suspicious is not a crime. Do you understand this? Being suspicious is not a crime, because then all they would have to do is just walk by anybody or drive by anybody and say, "I think you're suspicious, give me some ID. I think you're suspicious, I need to know who you are." Like, do you want to live in that state, ladies and gentlemen? In that state where just your very presence in public means you're suspicious? Now, let's take this into the next realm. Let's take this into the realm of interacting with public servants in the sense of going to a county commissioner's meeting, to a city council meeting, to how about this one? Let's say school board and school resource officers are there, and so on and so forth, on and on and on. Grampy guy, I see your message, and I raise you comment. I'll take a look at that. I want to juxtapose how the left does things. Sorry, Nunya, I had to start. I couldn't wait for people. I had to get this off my chest. Nunya Business has just got here. Can't believe y'all started without me. That's how I am. I roll alone. Anyway, here's the reality of civil discourse. The left are civil disobedience. The left does it very well, and to an extreme that everybody's afraid to touch. You know, a local guy here to me went to Farm Fest this week and called out Governor Walz and said, "Why would you allow the rioters to burn down a police precinct?" And he couldn't answer, and his handlers quickly moved him along, wouldn't let him answer the question, let alone the idea that he couldn't answer the question. But the left is incredibly good at affecting change through civil disobedience and not so civil disobedience. They've always been good at this. Sit-ins, bus protests, marches, they've always been very, very good at it. The conservatives, the constitutionalists, are not good at it because most of us are incredibly compliant. And so I'm going to juxtapose what happened to Lisa Hanson in her trial when she was being sentenced by Judge Joseph Butel. And I did some commentary on that, by the way. Judge Joey told Lisa, and I'm going to condense it down because he ranted and raved on her for a long time. He basically said, you consider yourself a social and political activist, and you don't know how to go about social and political activism. Your recourse is to take your beef, and I'm paraphrasing, your beef, and you need to take your beef to your legislator, to your senator. That's your recourse. You don't get to defy an order. He told her that. You do not get to defy an order. You need to comply with orders and take it up with your legislator. And as I was having a conversation with my friend Brian Warfield earlier this morning, what we realize, if you were a conservative constitutionalist, especially over the last 2 years with the COOF and the COOF restrictions that were put in place, you didn't have a representative. You know, here locally, Representative Greg Davids for our congressional district told a local business owner, you have to comply because they're going to nickel and dime you to death. There's not a damn thing I can do about it, so you might as well just go along with it. Now, how do you practice civil disobedience? By taking it to your legislator, and your legislator or your senator says there's nothing I can do. In fact, I'm going to tell you to comply. Civil disobedience is not you going to your senator, going to your House of Representatives and saying, please do this. And then when they say, sorry, there's nothing I can do, you go, okay, I'm going to go home now. Civil disobedience is when you petition and 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 you keep getting slacked, you are smacked down or ignored or pushed off and pushed into the corners and told that your opinion doesn't matter and we're not going to listen to you. Civil disobedience is when you actually begin to civilly disobey. And yes, it is possible to civilly disobey. You do not have to do every single cotton picking gosh darn thing that the state tells you to do. And I don't care if that representative of the state is a county commissioner or a city council member or a mayor, or if it's a guy that you grew up with who now wears a badge and a gun and he shows up and tells you, I need to see some ID. You do not have to comply with every single thing that they tell you to do, and you can be civil about it in your disobedience, but you do not have to comply all the time. This is why the left wins and the right keeps losing. The right is full of spineless cowards. And I don't care who clips this, and I don't care who takes this and tries to twist it out of context and tries to make me say something that I'm not trying to say. It is cotton picking time for the right to stop being so freaking worried about their reputation. I don't want to be seen as a bad person. I don't want anybody to think that I don't like law enforcement. I don't want anybody to think that I'm a criminal. I got news for you. The FBI and the DOJ have already labeled you all a bunch of insurrectionist criminals. You know that? You show up to a school board meeting and don't agree with the school board, they've determined that. Project Veritas has an FBI insider who has said, these are the kinds of people that we're labeling as criminals. Going and speaking out at a county commissioner meeting has made you a criminal. We can't worry about preserving our reputations anymore, ladies and gentlemen. We cannot worry about preserving our friendships and relationships anymore. We have come to a place where we need to become ungovernable. Ungovernable. Because we are the government. And I don't believe you walk up to every cop that you see and every county commissioner that you see and every janitor at the government center that you see. You don't walk up to them and say, hey, by the way, I'm your boss. You work for me. That's not how you do it. But there is a place for that if somebody's being unreasonable. It's vitally important for you people to understand this. Civil disobedience means you don't follow the rules when the rules violate your constitutional liberties, when the rules violate your rights and your freedoms. You don't have to obey. And a good cop, definitionally, is going to recognize that. Because a good cop knows the Constitution. A good cop knows their oath. A good cop knows that their duty is not to enforce every rule or every policy. In fact, a good cop's duty is not to enforce every code or every law on the books. A good cop's duty is to represent we the people in keeping their oath. In the conversation in the live stream on Facebook on Friday night, Rick Weibel, I keep saying his name wrong, from Midwest Swamp Watch, he was in there, and he and I were having this conversation and trying to get people to understand. Like, no, in that moment when this Sherburne County captain was in that room, when they told him to remove this woman, this bold, brave, patriotic, constitutionally minded woman in her Tiananmen Square moment. And if you do not know what I'm talking about, when I talk about the Tiananmen Square moment, for those of you that are too young to understand, when Chinese students were protesting the heavy-handedness and the authoritarianism of the Chi-Coms, one man stood in front of an entire rank of tanks, was willing to be run over by them to make a point. That's a quintessential moment that we should all look to. And that's what happened on Tuesday, is this woman stood up, and as she's being physically aggressed and moved out of the room, she continues to read her speech, and even gets to the point where she said, and our sheriff has said that he is constitutionally minded. He will defend the rights and the liberties of the people of this county because that's his duty. And she was removed in the midst of that. That moment has opened a door in Sherburne County and, quite frankly, in the state of Minnesota, and quite frankly could be opening the door across the United States for constitutional originalists, for constitutional conservatives, for tradcons, for normie cons even, who are sick and tired of the status quo, to start showing up to these god-dogged meetings and start demanding that these idiots who sit on these boards, who sit on these commissions, start to listen to us, or we are going to raise hell. I am tired of being ignored. And I am tired of having people say, well, once the cops show up, you got to do what they say. No, become ungovernable. You need to show up in mass to these meetings, to the point where they don't have enough people to remove you all. You want to know why Minneapolis burned? Because people didn't take their oath seriously. And they let loudmouth, troublemaker, real insurrectionist cause the problem. That's why Minneapolis burned. Minneapolis didn't burn because George Floyd died. Minneapolis burned because people didn't take their oath seriously. That should have pissed off the patriots. That should have pissed off the constitutionalists. And that should have pissed off the cops who just followed the orders and let them burn. Do you see the difference? Derek Chauvin was responsible for the death of George Floyd. Whether he killed him or not, he was responsible for his death. He went to trial. He got what he deserved. Every cop who stood by and followed orders from Jacob Fry down to their chief of police and stood by and allowed property to be burned was wrong. They weren't good cops. Well, we were outnumbered and we were following orders. I don't care. People, you've got to wake up and understand that being a good cop means you stand on your oath and you take unpopular positions if it means you're standing for the Constitution and for the Republic. Being a good cop is not looking at a silver-haired lady who's there to express her discontent with her local state, the county commission, and then removing her because he's being ordered to do so. As Rick and I said in the course of that stream on Friday night, he had a duty in that moment to not make a bad decision. He had a duty in that moment to not make the wrong choice. He had a duty in that moment to stand on his oath and protect her. Do you get it? Is this registering with any of you yet? And if this is pissing you off because you say, well, no, I got to back the cops, you don't understand what kind of risk I'm taking by saying these things. I put my money where my mouth is, and I lost my career for speaking up for people. I am going to lose more and more and more of my friends who are still in the law enforcement world, and I'm risking alienating relationships of people I'm very, very close to by saying these things. The duty of a cop, a duty of a sheriff's deputy is not to follow orders. The duty of a cop, a duty of a deputy, a duty of a state patrol trooper, the duty of anybody in law enforcement from the FBI is to always represent we the people and say what you're ordering me to do is wrong, and I am going to protect the Constitution. I'm going to protect the people. I am not going to follow these orders. I am not going to do what you tell me to do because what you're telling me to do is unethical and unconstitutional, and I will not abide by it. I was just following orders is never an answer. It is never the right thing to say. Ever. If those orders violate the liberties enshrined in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Period. That is vitally important. And I will call out anybody, friends or family, acquaintances or people I don't really care about, when I see it. I want to applaud Chief Deputy Duran of Sherburne County for going to bat for this bold woman, for this bold lady, for this bold patriot. I don't know what he said to the city or to the county administrator. I really don't know what he said. I have no idea. But I want to applaud him for saying what he said because it got her back in that room. But I'll be go to hell if I'm going to forget what that captain did and not demand that he apologize. I don't care how nice he is. Nice or not doesn't matter. In fact, nice is a problem because I don't care about nice if what you're doing is wrong. I don't care how nice you are when you're violating my constitutional liberties. You could be nice all day long about it. That still makes you criminal. That makes you an enemy of your oath. That makes you a violator of the oath that you took to keep and defend the Constitution of this republic. And you swear that oath. It's not just to follow orders. Your oath is to keep and defend the Constitution and this republic, which means you watch out for the people when it's uncomfortable for you. It's high time that the people who put on the uniform and put on the badge and put on a gun and are entrusted by the state to keep the peace and keep order start keeping the peace and keeping order when it comes to defending the Constitution, even if it means they lose their job. And I know how damn hard that is. I know what it means to sacrifice, and I am sick and tired of calling people heroes who are not willing to make that sacrifice. Don't you dare say, well, that's easy for you to say, because it isn't. It is not easy for me to say. I gave up so much. And I'd do it again. I know the darkness of loss for standing on principle. I know the darkness and the pain of what it means. I really do. And I'm not giving anybody a pass anymore. I don't care how much I love them. I don't care how well I know them. I don't care how much I care for them. They don't get a pass anymore. It's not worth maintaining a relationship or a friendship with someone who's not willing to stand on their oath. I don't care how well you know your chief of police. I don't care how well you know the sheriff. I don't care how well you know all of his chief deputies, all of his captains, and every one of his. I don't care if there's 10 people on the police department of your little town and 15 people in the sheriff's department or sheriff's office. Excuse me. I almost made and I'll make that clarification here shortly. I don't care if there's only 15 people in your entire county sheriff's office. I don't care how well you know them. I don't care. I don't care how much you want to be able to go out and buy them a beer when they're off duty, or have them over for a barbecue, or buy them a sandwich when they walk into Quick Trip and they're standing in line behind you. Because I've done that. I used to do that for people. I'm like, hey, I'm going to buy this guy's dinner. The guy behind me, I'm going to buy. Make sure whatever he's got, I'm going to buy it. Or I would see a police vehicle a couple of cars ahead of me in a drive-through, and I'd say, hey, I want to get that officer's lunch today, or whatever. I'm like, I don't care how long you want to continue to do that. Continue to do that. Continue to do that if you want, but also continue to have conversations with them and ask them how well they know the Constitution. Ask them if they understand their duty to interpose themselves between you and tyrannical powers, even at a local level, even if it's just a tiny little local despot. I don't care if it's a county commission that's out of control. Are they willing to stand up to that county commission? And here's why I make the difference, or make it such an effort to go around correcting people saying sheriff department over sheriff's office. You have a police department, you have a sheriff's office. And I'm not being pedantic here. I'm not saying, oh, well, you're parsing words. It just doesn't matter. No, it does matter. See, your police department is a department of your city government, the local city state. The police chief is an appointee by the mayor, or the mayor and the city council, or the city council. And sometimes there's a civil service commission involved. And that police chief, their career, their longevity is tied to their willingness to comply with everything that the mayor and everything the city council says. So it becomes quite political. You could, if you have a right-wing conservative or constitutionalist, it might work out well for you if that mayor or the city council agrees with you. But if they're on the left, that chief of police will not be picked for their constitutional positions. They're going to be picked for their subservience and their willingness to comply with the left-wing agenda of the mayor and the city council. The sheriff's office, on the other hand, is not subject to the county commission. Sheriff does not work for the county commissioners. Sheriff doesn't work for the county administrator. The sheriff is directly elected by we, the people. But here's the problem. The county commission holds the purse strings of the sheriff's office. Now, a good sheriff knows how to negotiate that, how to navigate that, and say, look, you're going to give me the budget that I asked for to hire staff, to hire the right staff, to train the staff, to keep the staff well equipped. And by well equipped, I do not mean driving around in MRAPs. No police agency, no law enforcement agency in the United States should have an MRAP. There's no reason why there should be any team driving around in a mine-resistant, all-purpose vehicle. Period. There's no reason for that. But well-equipped, decent cars with the medical gear that they need and the training that they need, chiefly on the, not chiefly, but in a very predominant sense on the Constitution. A good sheriff is going to stand up to the county commission and say, you're going to give me what I'm asking for, or I am going to smear you legitimately in the court of public opinion. I asked for X, Y, and Z. The county commission refused to give it to me. And here's why. They wanted all of my officers to be trained in this particular agenda. They wanted us to take equity into consideration when making arrests. And I told them they can take their equity and take a running jump at a rolling O. And then they cut our budget. So, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but your county commission has reduced my patrol deputy allotments by 10 this year, which means I'm going to have to not cover as many areas of the county for as many hours as you would like. So if you have a beef, take it up with the county commission. That's a good sheriff right there. Because he doesn't work for them. And he will know how to navigate that. But here's the problem. A lot of sheriffs play ball with the county commission and do whatever they want because they want more and more and more and more taxpayer money. So they can buy things that they don't need, or keep putting gas in that MRAP that they like to take out to, barricaded subject calls. And really what a barricaded subject is a guy who's too drunk to get out of his car. And yes, I've seen things like that happen across the country. And so a good sheriff knows how to navigate that. Bad sheriffs play ball and give the county commissioners what they want, especially if that county commission happens to be, left-leaning. And something else I want to address is the idea of a constitutional chief or a constitutional sheriff. Look, every one of them, the chief and the sheriff, all take that oath. They take the same oath that you do if you're in law enforcement. To keep and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Republic of the United States and the state that they're in, the Constitution and the state that they're in, and to follow lawful orders. I took an oath to follow lawful orders. I never violated a lawful order, by the way. Still lost my job and was accused of violating lawful orders. But this idea that my sheriff's a constitutional sheriff. Let me ask you this. Do you know of any staff working for the sheriff that violate the constitutional liberties of any people within the county? Because that is a problem with that deputy, for sure. That is a problem with that deputy, 100% for sure. Not going to argue that at all. That deputy's got a problem. But that deputy has a problem because the sheriff and the chief deputies and the captains allow that to be a problem. Period. There's no, oh, well, we didn't know. No, BS. If you don't know, it's because you're not paying attention. If you're not paying attention, that means you don't care. And if you don't care, that's a problem. When a deputy or a police officer saves a life, everybody applauds because this person had the training. Oh my gosh, look at that. This guy saved a dog's life. He crawled out on the ice and he saved a dog from drowning. And everybody applauds that. Oh man, look at the training to risk his life that he had. But when he pisses all over your constitutional duty or rights, most of the time nobody says anything, including the person who was victimized, because they don't want to rock the boat. Because if I rock the boat, they're going to be targeted. Yeah, I hear that all the time. I don't want to be targeted. I don't want to be targeted. I know, like, it's too damn late. You're already a target. You know why you're a target? Because you're a sheep. But then when a person does say something, they go, "Oh, well, there's like, well, they were just, just following orders. This person was just following orders." In the case of Sherburne County, a person running for elected position here in the state of Minnesota saw the 32-second video and immediately made a phone call to the sheriff of Sherburne County, Sheriff Brott, and said, "I am very disgusted by what that individual working for you did to this woman on Tuesday morning." And the sheriff said, "Hey, we're all about accountability." And this person running for office said, "Great, I'm glad you're for accountability. What are you going to do about that?" And he goes, "Well, there's nothing that can be done about that because the speaker broke the rules. And because she broke the rules, she had to be removed." Does that sound like somebody who's interested in the constitutional liberties of the public? No. It got corrected by the chief deputy, but the sheriff still made those comments post fact. And once again, I applaud Chief Deputy Duran. That was a phenomenal move on his part to go to bat for her. I know I keep bringing it back to Sherburne, but this is because these are the things that need to be brought to light. In this video, I said from DC to Ruby Ridge, we saw Capitol Police at a particular event in 2021 shoot and kill an unarmed woman. We saw Capitol Police open up gates, open up doors, open up barricades, and wave people in. That was a setup. Ruby Ridge, we saw law enforcement gun down a teenage boy. We saw law enforcement gun down a mother holding her child. And Weaver, who they tried to prosecute for all of that, was found not guilty by a jury of his peers. And the federal government ended up, we ended up paying out for that because oath takers abused their authority. Whether or not you like the Branch Davidians, and whether or not they were a cult, and whether or not there were all sorts of weird things going on there, did they deserve to die? Well, the federal agents, the BATF said that, and the FBI said that they started the fire in the compound themselves. Like, really? We're gonna trust the feds on this? Uvalde. I had a good Christian friend who came unglued and attacked me for hating law enforcement because I, from day one, called out the Uvalde officers and said, this stinks, this is rotten, it doesn't look good, and they're guilty of murder. and they need to be tried. And I stand by that. Every one of them who ultimately sat there in that hallway and waited for an hour to do something, and every one of them on the outside that waited for an hour to do something, and every one of them that put a taser on a parent, and every one of them that handcuffed a grieving parent, a terrified parent, every one of them should be summarily fired and tried for the murders of every one of those children because they were complicit in it. So from DC to Ruby Ridge, from Waco to Uvalde, from Minneapolis, letting that city burn, the killing of George Floyd, to defending Kim Potter, to not being willing to call out the bad behavior of a captain in Sherburne County. Every single one of those situations is an example of why we must hold law enforcement to a standard so much freaking higher than they're being held to right now. And I am so tired of hearing they're under scrutiny constantly. No, they're not. The only deputies, the only street cops that are held to a high level of scrutiny are the ones that will not comply with unconstitutional garbage. Those are the only ones. The ones that don't rock the boat, the ones that get along to go along, nobody cares. And like I said in one of the videos that is coming up, in fact, it's probably going to be the last video in the series, I'm going to be talking about a situation in Olmsted County in particular that demonstrates just how much law enforcement supervisors, men like Brian Howard and Kevin Torkerson of Olmsted County, will cover up incredibly bad acts that violate policy and procedure, violate civil rights. I'm going to tell the story. And yes, I'm going to be timing the release of it as carefully as possible. I don't want to hear about how your sheriff and your chief of police and the officers around you are constitutionally minded. I don't want to hear it. I want to see it. And when they put their hands on you and they violate your constitutional liberties as they're enshrined in the Constitution granted to you by the God of nature, they're not constitutional. And that captain should be made to apologize publicly in front of the county commission during a public comment section. And the sheriff should be making a statement that it will not happen again. Sheriff Broad, I'm calling on you right now to make a statement that your men and women, every single employee of the Sherburne County Sheriff's Office, will be receiving constitutional training. And in the next video, I'm going to be laying out a plan to put into the Minnesota House and the Minnesota Senate, and a plan to take to every county that I can and every city council that I can, tying the funding of law enforcement at the local state level, at the county state level, at the municipal state level, if you will, and at the state level, and at the federal level, tying the funding and the employment of law enforcement to demonstration chiefly of their ability to understand the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights in particular, and continuing education every year. They get continuing education on use of force. They get continuing education on how to use an AED. They get continuing education on first aid and first responder. They get continuing education on how to deal with people in a mental health crisis. They get continuing education on how to deal with people in a drug crises. They get continuing education on how to interact with people, and most of them don't do a very good job of it anymore. They get all of these continuing education classes, but there's never never any continuing education or any education at all on the Constitution and the duties of a person who wears a badge and a gun and represents the state on what their duty is when it comes to the Constitution. None. And that stops. And no agency should get any funding for anything until they agree that all of their staff will be trained annually to the tune of no less than 20 hours a year on matters of the Constitution and constitutional case law, if you will. I have the document written up. I need to fine tune it. It's going to go through a lot of work, but we are going to get this into the hands of legislators and senators and city council candidates and sitting council members and county commission candidates and county commissioners who are sitting now. We are going to get this into their hands, and we are going to make sure that constitutional originalists that are holding office get this done. If they cannot be trusted to uphold the Constitution, why would I give a damn how they feel about the laws they supposedly enforce? An inability of anybody in law enforcement to be able to recite the first 10 amendments on even a peripheral level is unexcusable and should be grounds for termination. Does that sound radical to you? Good. I don't care. You don't get a break anymore. This is our republic. You want to affect change, be willing to rock the boat. You want to affect change, be willing to lose your reputation. You want to affect change, be willing to not be seen as a sheep anymore. You want to affect change, practice civil disobedience. You want to affect change, be vocal. You need to start showing up to these meetings and shutting them down when they're not doing what they're supposed to do. Every single one of them is a constitutional officer. Do you understand that? Anybody working in the public sector is beholden to the Constitution. Anyone. You want to draw a paycheck from the people? You want to be part of the state that lives by taking taxes from people through the threat of force? Then you damn sure better be able to demonstrate that you understand the Constitution the way it was meant to be understood, or get your ass out of office, get your ass out of uniform, and go do something else. In a philosophical sense, we're coming for you. We may not burn down buildings because that's not what we do. We may not throw bricks through the fronts of businesses because that's not what we do. We may not destroy your homes because that's not what we do. But we're going to take over these meetings. If John Thompson can show up in Hugo, Minnesota and threaten to burn down Hugo, Minnesota because he doesn't like the president of the Minneapolis police union, and no one does a damn thing about it, no one. He communicated a threat to an entire freaking city, and no one did a damn thing because they were terrified of his presence. Elected representatives, elected servants, and appointed servants, you should be afraid of us in our vocality. And if we have to Barney Fife every one of you and take away your guns and only give you a bullet that you got to keep locked in the glove compartment of your cruiser for self-defense, then so be it. But we're taking back our county commissions. We're taking back our city councils. We're taking back our school boards. We're taking back our House, and we're taking back our Senate. You're going to play ball the way the Constitution meant you to play ball, or you can get out. Go somewhere else. Get a different job. For those of you that live in the Sherburne County area, I don't care if you have to give up 5 hours of work at the next council meeting, county commission meeting. You need to show up. Show up. and make that county commission apologize. Do not let that meeting happen until that county chair apologizes or resigns, because they will not apologize. We've seen this happen. Entire school boards have resigned en masse because parents groups have said enough is enough. And I got news for you. If you think this sounds radical and you're afraid of being put on a watch list by the FBI, it's too late. If you've gone to a meeting and voiced your discontent at any kind of meeting, city council, county commission, school board, yada, 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 they already have you on a watch list. It's why the group of the United Patriots for Accountability in Owatonna made some shirts and wore them that said we're all TC now, because the chair of the school board over there said we're looking for a way to keep that TC guy from the Minnesota Black Robe Regiment out of these meetings. And jokingly I said, well, you're all TC now, and they made shirts and some of them wore them to the meeting. You know what Sherburne County needs to do? A bunch of you need to get shirts that say we're all Terry now. And you should all be Terry. Become ungovernable. Practice civil disobedience. Affect change. And don't be worried about your reputation. Don't be worried about your relationships anymore. So, again, the next video in the series, we're going to be talking about what it means to tie funding to constitutional knowledge of every single law enforcement agency that you can think of. And on top of that, we're also going to be talking about how every deputy, every officer has a obligation to interpose, and we're going to go into the depths of that a little bit more. It is not constitutional, nor is it conservative to back the blue or the brown across the board anymore. It hasn't been for a long time, but it's time for y'all to wake up. And stop calling it the sheriff's department if you live in Minnesota, especially. It's a sheriff's office. It drives me crazy. I'm tired of having to correct it. It's a sheriff's office. Frankly, it's your office. If anybody wants to talk about any of this, I would appreciate it. I would appreciate it if you guys would comment and share. Go over to my subscribe star and throw me a few dollars a month. Please. I'm asking you. It really does help. Been scrolling across the bottom of the screen for a little while, but it's not going to be scrolling anymore. Once again, I really appreciate everybody watching. Please share this out. Let's make sure that people who really need to see this see it, because I think this is maybe one of the most important conversations we could possibly be having right now. So, my friends, until next time, fight for your liberties, fight for your freedoms, and Sic Semper Tyrannis.
We are going for liftoff in T-30. Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. Secondary guidance systems engaged. Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark. Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at